This is a Rough Tiger production.
And you, and you, and you, and you were there. Some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful.
Howdy.
Howdy, Bryan. Howdy, everybody out there in listener land, which is a horrible thing I'll never say again. Welcome to Dream Idiots.
We are back again. Thanks for listening, folks, and for coming along for our fabulous little ride here. Every week on Dream Idiots, we tell each other stories. My name is Bryan. That's Morris. And we tell each other stories from history, from news, from our personal lives, and you get to tag along.
Yay. Bryan, we've got a website up, we've got some merch there, we've got some other things going on. Bryan, where can the folks find that stuff?
You can go to dreamidiots.com. You can actually listen to the podcasts on that site. You can download and listen on essentially every platform out there. So Apple Podcasts and Spotify and everything on those platforms. If you'll give us 5 stars and shoot us a review, that would be hugely helpful. Help us climb the charts a bit. But we thank you for all the stuff you're doing for us because it's cruising along and we're getting good feedback. So that's always nice.
Yes, sir. And it is an odd episode. So, Bryan, you get to go first this time. Take it away.
This one's going to be odder than most. Alrighty. So for your 3-parter recently, we delved into the American Indian movement and awfulness that has been perpetrated on natives in this country. This is not necessarily a terribly happy story either, but it's maybe at least somewhat in the same vein. We're going to talk a little bit about a woman named Henrietta Lacks. So Henrietta Lacks was born, her birth name was Loretta Pleasant, born August 1st, 1920. She was born in Roanoke, Virginia. She apparently was a small woman. She was barely 5 feet tall. She liked to dress nicely. She favored painted nails and pleated skirts. And no one seems to know why her name was changed from Loretta. Her mother died young after giving birth to her 10th child, and Henrietta bounced around quite a bit and lived with grandparents. Many years later, she would marry her first cousin, a guy named David Lacks. She had her first child at the age of just 14 in 1934. That's too early. She would eventually have 5 children. And when she wasn't raising them, she was working in tobacco fields in Virginia. So January 29th, 1951, Lacks goes to Johns Hopkins, and it's the only hospital in the vicinity that treated Black patients. She went because she felt a knot in her womb, she said. She had previously told family about the knot, and they had assumed, correctly as it turned out, that she was pregnant. This was child number 5. So after giving birth to Joseph in 1935, Lacks had a severe hemorrhage, and her main doctor tested her for syphilis. That came back negative, and they referred her back to Johns Hopkins. There, she had a doctor named Howard Jones who took a biopsy of her cervix and found a mass there. She was then told that she had malignant epidermoid carcinoma of the cervix. Turns out decades later, 1970, after subsequent analysis, she'd actually been misdiagnosed. She actually had adenocarcinoma, but it would have scarcely have mattered as the treatment for both of these cancers in the 1950s was exactly the same. So Lacks is 31 years old, and she is treated for this cancer with radium tube inserts. I actively chose not to look up radium tube inserts because something tells me it's awful. This is cancer treatment 70 years ago, but she got this treatment at the time as an inpatient. She was discharged a few days later. She was given instructions to return a few days later for an x-ray. During her treatments, 2 samples were taken from Lax's cervix without her permission or her consent. One was a sample of healthy tissue, and the other one was cancerous. These samples were then given to a guy named George Otto Gay, Gey. Gay is a physician at the time, and he's a researcher, cancer researcher at Johns Hopkins. So it's important to remember at this time, scientists, they're trying to keep human cells alive, in culture form, and they've been trying to do this for decades, but these cultures die. Henrietta's were different. They reproduced an entire new generation of cells every 24 hours, and they never stopped. They are, they're, I guess they're not really technically immortal, but they're called the first ever immortal human cells ever grown in a laboratory, and they became known as the HeLa, Hela, the first initials of her first and last name, the HeLa immortal cell line. And they are now in 2022, even now, still very commonly used in biomedical research.
You mean her specific cells that have been
her specific cells? Yes. From Henrietta. Her cells have been critical in a whole host of medical research. Jonas Salk used them working on polio. A guy named Chester Southam was a virologist. Started using it with cancer patients. Prison inmates have used treatments featuring her cells extensively. Her cells have been in high demand, and they were basically put into mass production. And they are used in a whole host of medical and just frankly countless scientific pursuits. They have been successfully cloned. In 1955, they were used to test human sensitivity to tape and glue and cosmetics and other products. And to date, there are a total of 11,000 patents involving Henrietta's original cells.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And she had no idea. This never gave consent. So in the early 1970s, a large portion, a huge portion of other cells in some laboratory became contaminated with Henrietta's cells. And so as a result of this, Henrietta's family, again, she had 5 children, and I'm not sure how many grandchildren, very, very large extended family. Henrietta's family started to receive solicitations from researchers wanting them to basically donate genetic material so they could differentiate the HeLa contaminated cells from the cells that were not contaminated with her cells. But until 1975, no one in her family had any idea that her cells were still alive, being used in any form or fashion whatsoever. Right.
So they basically get a letter saying, remember that stuff we stole from your family a while back, the genetic material? Well, we need some more of it. And they're like, wait, what? What did you steal from? When? Who?
Yeah. So, a number of her family members are, to say that they are alarmed would be putting it mildly. They're pissed off. They're confused. They're getting telephone calls, requesting samples, and they had no idea. We're not privy to any of this whatsoever. And now they start to ask questions about, what did you do? Why did you do it? How much money has been made off of all this? And to say that they are reticent to get involved and are questioning the motives of the people that are calling them would be putting it mildly. So to shift gears here a little bit, I didn't want to have to rewrite a portion of the story, because there's a writer who's already dived into this topic quite a bit, and who wrote something here that is better than I could ever possibly conceive of. There's a writer named Rebecca Skloot. She is a fairly prominent science writer. She would, in 2010, she released a book called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And there are numerous articles about Blacks on NPR and nature.org and several other sites. But this is she wrote the book on Henrietta, and this is taken from a February 1st, 2010 article on NPR from Rebecca. Rebecca is almost exactly our age, 50-ish, was in college in the late 80s. And she talks about having gone to, I believe, a freshman biology class when she was an undergrad, and goes to a lecture, and this prof's name is a Dr. Deffler. And so this is me quoting Rebecca Skloot, quoting Deffler. Deffler says, "We learned that by studying cancer cells in culture," he basically, as part of this lecture, he writes in huge letters on the chalkboard the name Henrietta Lacks. Deffler goes on to say, "Henrietta's cells have now been living outside her body far longer than they ever lived inside it. Her cells went to almost any cell culture lab in the world, and if you opened any of their freezers, you would find," this is late 80s, "you would find millions, if not billions, of Henrietta's cells in small vials on ice." Again, quoting Skloot from NPR.org, quote, "Henrietta's cells were part of research into the genes that cause cancer and those that suppress it. They helped develop drugs for treating herpes, leukemia, influenza, hemophilia, and Parkinson's disease. They've been used to study lactose digestion, sexually transmitted diseases, appendicitis, human longevity, mosquito mating, and the negative cellular effects of working in sewers. Their chromosomes and proteins have been studied with such detail and precision that scientists know their every quirk. Like guinea pigs and mice, Henrietta's cells have become the standard laboratory workhorse." Again, Skloot now quoting Deffler again, "Gela's cells were one of the most important things that have ever happened in medicine in the last 100 years. Then, matter-of-factly, almost as an afterthought, Deffler says she was a Black woman," unquote, then erased her name off the chalkboard in one fast swipe and blew the chalk from his hands.
Wow.
So this writer, Rebecca Skloot, dives into Henrietta's life in detail. As a result of her research, befriends and enters into a lengthy business relationship with Henrietta's, I believe, eldest daughter, Deborah, in order to understand Henrietta's story in greater detail, and really try to tell that story and honor her legacy and make sure that her story is better known. In 1999, one of Henrietta's granddaughters took an intro biology class and realized at one point that she was holding a vial with her grandmother's cells.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Yeah. Uh-huh. So this is just an unreal case. They have apparently made some money off of this later on. Not that money is the end all be all of things, but the National Institutes of Health have signaled that they want to make changes to what's called the Common Rule, which is the set, broadly speaking, it's the set of policies that protect the rights of human participants in research. So even if donors have been de-identified in this research, those that have whose DNA or whose material is in this study, they still have to give consent to being in the study. This woman was only born in 1920. I mean, I'm not saying she would have lived to be 100, but if she were alive today, she'd be 102. There is a program, an initiative, whatever, called Gila 100 that is basically tied to her legacy, that her children and grandchildren have endeavored to push along to honor her legacy. There are a number of medical conferences that are basically held in her name. There are statues in honor of Lacks at the University of Bristol and at Johns Hopkins. And there is, if you Google her name, there is a little bit on the Johns Hopkins website and other things that have been published under the Hopkins name. And it's sort of funny to look at that a little bit, because at least in my mind, when you read it, it is very careful to laud Henrietta's contributions, etc., while simultaneously seemingly making the argument that taking samples in this way was common practice at the time. And so it's kind of the, yeah, she's great, but and by the way, we didn't really do anything that was that bad. At least that's how I sort of read it. Anyway, yeah, her story, I mean, by virtue of the book that Skloot writes in 2010, the book was turned into a documentary and then a movie that starred, Oprah actually starred as Deborah Lax, Henrietta's daughter. So the book came out in 2010, the movie came out in 2017. And there's quite a bit on YouTube and elsewhere about Henrietta and her legacy. But again, this is not unlike your story. Another just classic example of a repressed group being completely taken advantage of. And even when and her family was given an opportunity, they could have, those that are making money off of her could have come forth and tried to do the right thing decades before. And her family only found out about this because those same researchers were going back to them again, looking for more information, more DNA. So anyway, a very, very, I think, important, critical, interesting story of a woman who is only now sort of getting her due, even though she had no idea. But somewhere in the research, it says that this material has been replicated so much that a single cancer cell weighs effectively nothing, but it has been reproduced so many times that if you weighed everything that has been made from her DNA, it would weigh 50 million metric tons.
Bryan, where do you find these? That's just another astonishing story. That's incredible. And it just speaks to so much of what has been, bodily autonomy and all of the arguments that were going on with COVID and all of the arguments that were so specious in the face of Roe v. Wade being struck down, with to what extent do we control our own bodies, and particularly women controlling their own bodies. And
right,
just, that's an astonishing story.
Yeah, it's weirdly, stunningly, and in 2022, with all this horseshit about anti-Semitism and Elon Musk, and it's like, seriously, it's just mind-boggling to me that there are people that I'm sure, if anyone came across this story that was related to Dr. Gay, who did the original biopsy, whatever. People see these stories and think that the outrage that you and I feel about it is baseless or specious or ridiculous, and that's just how can you be a sentient human being so devoid of empathy that you would deem this treatment anything but reprehensible? I just don't get it. But happily, there are people like Skloot who's working on it and trying to make sure that she's given her due. But like, holy shit, what sorry folks, Black people are not less than, they're not cattle, they're not livestock, you can't euthanize them. Why is this hard to understand? But apparently it is, even now.
Well, Bryan, that was a heavy story, and that would have wow, thank you. That was
not that funny, but interesting. So I urge you, the book, which I have not read the whole thing of, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, is not super long, but incredibly interesting.
It sounds like it. My goodness, I'm speechless. This is
sorry.
No, it's okay. It's never heard of this woman, but so much of what we've learned about the body and science is owed to her and her her unwilling participation in or unknowing participation in these scientific endeavors.
Yep.
Wow.
This week on Dream Idiots, we destroy your mood or something.
Okay.
Shifting
So
gears.
how do we
Go
dig
ahead.
ourselves out of this
Very, very quick. I'm gonna read to you briefly because we do have a curse word for you. Ready?
Yes.
There we go. Okay. Coming from the Pocket Dictionary of the Vulgar Tongue, also known as the Dream Idiots Book of Common Prayer. Gentlemen of 3 ins versus gentlemen of 3 outs. Neither one is a compliment. They're both insults.
Gentlemen of 3 ins versus gentlemen of 3 outs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Bryan, I'm going to take just a shot in the dark that it has something to do with orifices, but I don't.
No,
And that's as far as I'm going to go with it, because
no, it's reasonably benign. Gentleman of 3 ins as someone who's in debt, in jail, and in danger of remaining there for life. And gentleman of 3 outs is someone who's without money, wit, or manners. So yeah, fairly benign.
So
benign
in
insult.
debt, so wait, the first one was in debt, in jail, or
and in danger of remaining there, and then outs
okay.
without money, wit, or manners.
Oh, I know. I've been accused of being both of those things at one time or another. So
There you go.
okay, I've got to get my mind out of your gutter, I guess, when it comes to these
You
curse words.
have to cleanse the palate. Okay.
All right. Are you ready for my contribution for the week?
I am.
Okay. I'm going to try to be as lighthearted as I can the last episodes of the year. And this is a little story about what it's like to work retail during the holidays. Bryan, have you ever done that? Worked retail during the holidays?
I've never worked. I worked in restaurants, but I never worked retail actually.
I'm a firm believer that there are 3 people who get an automatic pass into whatever heaven is when we're done with this particular phase of existence. People who work retail, people who've waited tables, and people who teach middle school.
Fair enough.
And so I'm calling this particular little piece "Shoplifters of the World Unionize." And during college, particularly my later years, I seem to have had almost unlimited energy, and you were much of the same way. In a typical fall semester, I took 15 to 18 hours of classes. I worked at a radio station for another 15 to 25 hours a week. And then I would put in, usually starting around Thanksgiving, I'd put in, probably 15 to 20 hours at a record store. And then there's all the usual college shenanigans to get up to in the course of the week. And then usually on the weekends, I'd help my dad out at our ranch for, a few hours every weekend. And one particular record store I worked in, I'll call it Pam Woody. It was one of the Pam Woody stores. I would work there as seasonal help, and it would allow me to pick up holiday gifts for friends and family at a discount. I could check out all the new releases, and the manager was a guy named Marvin, and it's a guy I've known him since high school. He's about 8 years. Marvin, I know you're listening. Believe he's about 8 years or so older than I am, and he was and is like the cooler older brother who knows all of the great albums inside out. He remains one of my closest friends. He's a good friend to you. And he's also a good friend of the pod. We know he listens every week. In fact, he commented on the most recent episode, like the day it dropped. And I try to spend time with Marvin every time I'm in San Antonio. But one time, one of my Christmas seasonal works there, I was working a shift at the store, and I headed to the office in the back to retrieve some odder end, and I walked into a completely dark room. And I reached for the light switch, and a voice from somewhere in the back of the dark office said, "No lights, quiet." And this came out of nowhere, and I had no idea. And then I saw Marvin kind of standing in the shadows, holding a mug of coffee in one hand, and with his other hand, he was pointing to the one-way glass in the door. "Shoplifters," he said. "Watch this." And I stood there next to him, and we peered out the tiny window, and there were two boys stuffing cassettes as quickly as they could into their jacket pockets. And Marvin was pretty much out of the door in a flash, and he told me to have someone up front call security. He guided the two offenders into the back office, and then he flipped on the light, and he told me to keep these two gentlemen company until security got there. So that's how I spent the next 15 minutes or so with these two. I'd say they're 12, 13 years old. These two 13-year-old thieves saying nothing, making no eye contact. They were saying nothing themselves. We were just the three of us sitting there being quiet. And I don't recall if I thought of my own shoplifting misadventure then, but I certainly recall it now. I was much younger. I was about 6 years old. And I would frequently accompany my father to a local hardware store chain we had in San Antonio called, do you remember Handy Dan's? Do you remember Handy Dan?
No, there was Handy Andy grocery store, Handy Dan's, and I have no idea.
Handy Dan was I think there were two or three of them in San Antonio at one point. And he would go to Handy Dan and I would follow him. This is way before we got things like Lowe's and Home Depot. And I would go with him to Handy Dan whenever he needed some particular tool or materials or whatever. And one night, I remember it was in the winter because it was cold and I was wearing a red cotton jacket, little hoodie that I had when I was a kid. And I would wander the aisles with him when he was looking for whatever he wanted. And some places still have this, but a lot of them got rid of it for obvious reasons. They used to have in hardware stores, mounted on a post in one aisle, there would be a series of coiled chains and you could pull off the length you needed.
Oh yeah,
and they
sure.
actually had like a bolt cutter right there on the wall that you could just cut it. And of course they got rid of that for obvious,
Right.
safety reasons. Although I remember seeing one as probably as maybe even 10 years ago. I remember still seeing one.
Well, yeah, more recently than that. Yeah.
You could cut off lengths of chain and pay by the foot. And so scattered around the post on the floor are the discards, the links of chain that's just, you cut them in half. And so they resembled the squashed letter C or torn up distended letter U. They're just down on the floor. And for whatever reason, my 6-year-old brain picked up one of those and thought to myself, hey, I bet mom would like one of these. And I put it in my pocket and forgot about it and went shopping with my dad and immediately forgot about it. So later that night, I was messing around in the garage for some reason. And my dad came out and he had my jacket in one hand and in the other he had the cut chain link. And he came out and he said, where did you get this? And I didn't respond. He said, did you get this from Handy Dan? And I vaguely remember nodding. He said, you stole this. You stole this from the store. And I could say nothing. And he said, I'm calling the store to let them know you did this and that you're a thief. And then he promptly turned on his heel, shut the door, and went back in the house and just kind of left me out in the garage, wondering what was going to happen. And I was afraid I was going to get arrested that very night. I'm not sure what he did, or with 6-year-old logic, would they really come and arrest me for a cut piece of metal that was laying on the floor? And I picked it. That would probably just get swept into the trash at that point in 1977.
Right.
So I don't recall ever intentionally shoplifting again. There have been a couple times where I accidentally bought a couple of packets of straws and I only paid for one. And then the next time I went back, I actually said, I want you to scan this, but don't put it in the bag. And this was at my local Target. And they're like, why? I said, I accidentally got two last time, but I only paid for one. And they just looked at me like I was a lunatic. But another time I was in, of all places, Auckland, New Zealand. I was flipping through this pop culture book on psychology, and I was digging it. I'm like, man, I can't wait to read this. This is great. So I put it in my briefcase and just walked out of the store with it, the bookstore in the airport. I'm like, I just walked down to the pub, ordered a beer, and I'm flipping through it. And about 10 minutes into my beer in the book, I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't pay for this damn thing. So I went right back to the bookstore, got in line, paid for it, and went through the checkout line, because that was the last thing I needed, was to be stuck in the Auckland airport trying to come back home while shoplifting a book. But none of this went through my mind as I sat in this back room of a mall record store, and the two boys were sitting quietly awaiting their fate, as I had years prior when I'd stolen a small piece of metal. And then one of the boys turned to the other, and in one of the most perfectly delivered lines ever, turned to his friend with a shrug, and in a flat voice simply said, "Well, Merry Christmas, man." And I could barely keep it together. I was trying. George Carlin has this bit about repressed laughter being the best kind of laughter. In his case, it was kneeling in front of a casket. In me, it was trying to not laugh at that line. It was one of the most perfectly delivered, appropriate, just great. I was just stifling my laughter, staring at the back wall. Security could not come soon enough because I could not afford to let these two kids see me laugh. But that right there was a great Christmas gift. But for luck and circumstance, it could have easily been me in the back office of our local handy Dan, or heaven forbid, a security office in an airport on the far side of the planet. So take it easy on the retail folks, although I know a lot of folks do online shopping when you're out and about this holiday season. Shoplifters of the world, unionize.
Yep, very nice. I've done that exact same thing on more than one occasion with glasses. I can go somewhere and try sunglasses or eyeglasses on, find the one I want, and then put them on my head, and then walk out of the store. I've done that at least twice. So, and then
go back in, or you just keep going?
No. And then one time it was I bought a pair at the local pharmacy I use all the time in Austin. So I was in there all the time, and so when I was in there again 3 days later, I ripped off the little barcode and said, "Yeah, just scan this." And I stole this. I didn't mean to. Sorry. Oh, no problem.
Yeah, and I felt bad for the kids, but man, there was an awful lot of cassette tapes in those jacket pockets. I mean, it was bulging with cassette tapes.
And so what happened to them? I mean, in Texas, they're on death row. No, what happened to them?
I security came, and I guess they called their parents. I
Right.
don't remember. That was one of the least eventful things I think that worked at that. It happened at that particular music store while I worked there as a temp. But yeah, I had told one of my sons that I was doing this story, and he said, I don't feel so bad when someone steals from a major corporation. And I was like, oh, I wonder where he gets that attitude from. I don't know. Anyway, tip well this holiday season, and as always, be good to each other.
Thanks. Bye.
Have a good one.